Yes, you are welcome. You are welcome. You are welcome to this e-facilitation class once again. Great Greek students. This is the third week of this e-facilitation. As you may well be aware, of course, my name is Dr. Abayomi Samuel Bankole. I've been your course facilitator and your online facilitator for this course, ANP313 Poultry Production. Like I said, we have spent 2 weeks in this facilitation. We have 5 weeks to go if today's class is concluded. Now, let me just share my screen so that we get the class started immediately. Yeah, I want to believe you can see my screen. Unfortunately, I do not have any student yet in class, but this class will be recorded. Yes, I think it's very, very clear right now. Yes, so we have spent the last 2 weeks looking at the first topic, which is on the equipment and the building of the poultry house. Also, we last week were able to look at the management principle in the hatchery of poultry eggs. Today, we are looking at the fundamentals for successful poultry production. Fundamentals for successful poultry production. That's what we shall be looking at today. If you have any query, you can reach out to me by email asbankole@noun.edu.ng. Let's move on. Yes, by way of introduction, the transformation of plant, animals, and mineral matters into forms highly prized as a source of food for man is the primary basis for the poultry production, and that is why this is a fundamental principle. Feeding is a fundamental principle in poultry production. There's no doubt about that. In fact, we normally say that feeding takes 70% of the cost of production in poultry, and that is instructive. Now, from the nutritional standpoint, the nutrients contained in a poultry feed, they are as useful to man as to the laying hen. However, as eggs of poultry meat, these nutrients are in much more palatable form, of course. Now, the profitable poultry production, the conversion of feed to eggs and meat must be done efficiently and economically. And to formulate rations that will do this, it's necessary you know something of the food nutrients and their use by the poultry. Today, we have 3 major intended learning outcomes. Number one, by the end of today's class, you will be expected to understand the purpose of poultry feeding. And of course, 2, you are expected to select feed ingredients to compound diets for poultry birds. And 3, it's expected that you should be able to outline forms of feed presentation in poultry industry. Well, basic terms commonly used in the poultry world. They include all of this, which you will find in your course material. I won't be able to go into details of this, but I'll just mention them here. Nutrients is number one. That is very, very important to know the meaning. Feed stuff is another term related to feeding of poultry. Feed, of course, the feed that the animal take is another term in poultry feeding. Supplements, another is ration. Another is diet, and another is dry matter. Another term is ash. Nitrogen-free extract is another one. Poultry energy ratio, another one, and so on and so forth. So let's begin really today's class by classifying feed ingredients in the poultry industry. And number one we have here is carbohydrates. Yes, carbohydrates. These are the major source of energy in the poultry diets, and they include grains, cereal byproducts, starch roots and tubers. An example of grains are maize, guinea corn, millet, wheat, and broken rice. You know all of this, I want to believe. Example of cereal byproducts are maize bran or offal, wheat bran or offal, rice bran or offal, and guinea corn offal. Starch roots and tubers examples include cassava flour, cassava chips, and sweet potato. So now the dietary inclusion of 30 to 60% of these energy sources, that is carbohydrates, into the poultry diet is recommended, with the upper limit mainly for young growing birds. So you need to note this, very, very important. These are part of the principles that you have to note. It shouldn't be more than 60%. And of course, the 60% of carbohydrates in any feed is for young growing birds. Another classification of feed ingredients in poultry industry is, or poultry birds, is the protein. Yes, commonly used protein feed ingredient for poultry ration formulation include vegetable/plant sources such as groundnut cake, soybean cake, full-fat soya, cotton seed cake, and palm kernel cake. Now, another is animal protein sources such as fish meal, meat, bone meal, blood meal. Now, another classification is fats. Yes, fat. Considerable quantity of fat are used in poultry feeding. Yes, primarily as a potent source of energy as well, just like we use carbohydrates. Now, fats normally contain 2 or 3 times as much metabolizable energy per unit of weight as grains. Major sources available as vegetable oil include palm oil, groundnut oil, soybean oil, and other major sources of fat are hard fat, soft fat, and hydrolyzed animal fat. Now, the usual practical limit for adding fat is between 3 to 5% of the diet. Please take note of this. We said for the carbohydrate the other time is between 30 to 60%. Now we are talking of fats, it should be between 3 to 5%. Although special technique pelleted diet may contain as high as 7 or even 8% added fat. Rations very high in fat tend to kick and do not flow readily. That is, animals may not really like them if they are too high, their feed is too high in fat. Now, another classification of feed ingredients in poultry birds is vitamins. The vitamins are commercially available in pure forms in the market, or as vitamin concentrates at a relatively low cost. Now, they can be added. It can be added to a poultry feed by means of a premix, which supplies specified amount of each vitamin. Now, certain ingredients available for poultry feed are potent sources of vitamins. Now, excuse me, please. This include yeast, fat solubles, distiller solubles, liver meal, alfalfa meal, and milk byproduct. Now, all the fat soluble vitamins. We normally call them ADEC back in the day. And they are supplied by fats and oil. Another classification of feed ingredient is minerals. Minerals, yes. Sources of the major mineral for poultry ration include bone meal, limestone, oyster shell, dicalcium phosphate, defluorinated phosphate, common salt, and trace mineral premises. Yes, minerals are very, very important. You don't want to miss them. Now, and lastly, of the classification of feed ingredient in poultry is water. Oh, you will say water. Yes, water, very important. Now, water, some water is actually available in the feed itself. We call them metabolic water, but the bulk of water have to be separately provided in drinking cans for birds. Now, cool, clean water should be provided at all times. At all times, yeah, you shouldn't starve poultry water, especially in the tropics, because weather is always hot. Now, the water should also be free from excess salt, which might have a laxative effect on the poultry beds. Now, let's go to another thing: feed practices and presentation. I want to look at the different feeding practices in the poultry industry and how they are presented. Now, the success of raising poultry depends very much on the adequate feeding of the birds, as we have said earlier. Now, the feed offered to poultry at all times are referred to as ad libitum, while the controlled feeding system is called is referred to as restricted poultry feeding. Let's take these two one after the other. Number one, the unrestricted, or what we call ad libitum feed program. Now, when feeds are available to the birds at all times, the practice is commonly referred to as ad libitum feeding. Now, this method of feeding allows the poultry to consume feed to appetite or want. Birds raised for meat, such as broilers, are preferably fed ad libitum. Now, what are the advantages? Number one, more uniform body weight are attained at maturity. Two, feed management technique is less complicated as compared to the feeding regime in the feed restriction programs. Now, birds that feed themselves at will are less stressed up. Yes, if they just feed and feed at all times, they are not liable to stress. Now, what are the disadvantages of ad libitum feeding program? One, birds dey overheat and increase feed costs during the rearing period. Meat-type broiler birds, meat-type breeders like the broiler, tend to overeat and grow excessively, thus compromising production efficiency and profitability. And lastly, is overweight on the part of the broiler breeders, which make them prone to prolapse, reduce fertility, hatchability, and reproductive failure. The second feeding practice is the restricted control or controlled feeding program. Now, feed is supplied to the birds in this program in limited quantity or quality. Now, various bird strains are often grown on controlled feeding program to limit weight, particularly with broiler breeder strains. Now, the female feed intake may be adjusted to delay egg at sexual maturity to maintain desired body weight and reduce prolapses. If the birds are overweight, some form of feed restriction can be imposed. It is really quite advisable to start the restricted feeding program from 6 weeks of age, although some breeders recommend earlier ages such as between 2 and 3 weeks of age, depending on the purpose. Advantages include reduction in the cost of feeding the birds during the growing period. 2, feed restriction will result in later maturing birds that lay larger eggs at the initial stage. So we could say the restricted or controlled feeding program is more advantageous in egg-laying birds, layers. Birds are less fat, yes, and thus it protects the birds from breeding problems due to excess fat. Now, it also leads to the production of more hatchable eggs during laying period. Disadvantages include management of the restricted feeding program is more complicated. We told you for the unrestricted feeding program, the feeding or management of that is not so complicated, but in restricted, it is complicated. So birds may be more uneven in body size, mainly because of differential feed intake of bulls versus timid birds. Now, it is more troublesome to feed the birds because they fight amongst themselves in a bid to get at the feed, and also there can be increase in cannibalism and mortality problems because there's little to eat or not enough to eat. Now, let's look at forms of feeds. Yes, we have different forms of feeds available. Don't forget, we have looked at the definition of feeds earlier, and I told you to go through those terms one after the other. But let's look at the forms in which these feeds are commonly presented. Number one, different kinds of chicken feeds are all available as commercially or homestead forms. Now, commercial feeds in most cases, they will come in the form of dry mixture called mash and sometimes pellets or crumbles. Now, whether commercial or home mixed, feeds must match the different protein needs of chicken, grower, broiler, and layers of chicks, grower, broiler, and layers. Now, it is the protein content which, sorry, please. Right. Now, it is the protein content which distinguishes what feed should be given to these different ages and types of chicken. Now, let's take a look at a few of them. Among the ways of feeding chicken include 1, the whole mash system. It is the use of a complete ground feed. It is well adapted to use with the mechanical feeding system. Wet mash is an example of the all mash. Then under this, you see chicken usually eat more wet mash than the dry because they enjoy its consistency. However, wet mashes, particularly in hot weather, go bad very quickly. Hence, only an amount which will be consumed within 2 hours should be fed. Dry mash, when it is well balanced and stored properly, dry mash usually is the best way of feeding confined chicken. It is commercially sold with these designations. The chick mash contains 20% protein, while the grower mash contains 16 to 17% protein. Broiler mash will contain 20 to 23% protein, while layer mash will contain 15 to 17% protein. We have said it earlier that the protein content that determines the kind of feed you give to chicks, grower, broiler, and layers. Let's go to another form. Another form is the pellet or crumbles. the pellet or crumble. Commercial mixtures in pellet or crumble forms are excellent, but they usually cost more than the mash. Now, chicken may produce slightly better with the pellet or crumble form. Pellet and crumble forms reduce feed wastage, and the chicken may eat them a little better. Another form is the whole grain. Now, feed is often used for whole grain either by itself or mixed with other nutrients. Sometimes whole grain is scattered in the litter. The whole grain method of feeding is not recommended. Why? Now, when fed with other ingredients, the grain is eaten first. That's the reason, resulting in improper diets. When scattered, much is contaminated or lost. So you need to take note of this. The cafeteria system, this allows the birds to balance their own ration. Grain is fed in one feed, and a high 20% protein supplement is fed in another feeder. Now, feed is kept in feeders at all times, more or less like the hardly beaten system. Now, older birds may tend to eat too much grain and not enough protein supplement when the system is used. Finally, before we go today, we want to look at tips to achieving a high feed efficiency. Tips to achieving a high feed efficiency. We have 7 underlisted here. 1, adequate feeding space should be provided at all times, ensuring that about 75% of the birds can feed at the same time. 2, feeders should be well designed with leaves to prevent feed wastage. 3, feeders should be filled to not more than half full capacity. Number 4, feeders should be properly hung, ensuring that the level of feeders correspond to the back of the chicken, and in order to activate the feed in the feeders regularly with the hands, and also activate the feed in the feeder regularly with hands. Now, number 5, to avoid feed contamination and wastage, rat population should be constantly kept low. Number 6, attendants should minimize feed spillage during the process of serving feed to reduce feed wastage. And lastly, do not store feed for too long or in damp places, otherwise it can become moldy. Yes, we have come to the end of today's class, and in summary, what have we done? We have been able to look at the following: the definitions of terms used in feeds and feeding. Number 2, we have been able to look at feed ingredient classification based on nutrient supply. Also, we have been able to look at the different types of feeding program. And lastly, we have been able to check out the different forms of feed presentation. Yes. So we have come to the end of today's class, and I am happy to have concluded today's class, but unfortunately, I do not have any students appearing despite repeated email sent to them. But that notwithstanding, you can always have this class watched over and over again. Simply go to the platform and you will find a recorded version of this class. So in that case, you will not have missed so much. Meanwhile, if you have any question, don't hesitate to email me. Yes, I am available at any point in time. Just email me, and before you know it, you'll have the answers to your disturbing questions. All right, so this has brought me to the end of today's class, and till we meet in the next class, I wish you well, and I say bye-bye.